The Great Debate Series. Best Rivalries.
Okay, I'll go first here. Best music rivalry. This is a little weird. We're doing these cultural rivalries. What's the best, to me, this is the most important lasting music rivalry, and that would be the Beatles versus the Rolling Stones. So, obviously, the two supergroups from the 60s, everybody knows who they are. Even if you miss their music by 40 years, you've heard of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. So I asked my mom, who was around in the 60s, big music fan. I was like, is this really a rivalry?
Yeah.
Because you'd heard the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. She said, yes, you could not be a fan of both bands.
Is that right?
That's what she said.
Okay.
She said,
I agree.
I mean, right now we're talking about
her.
two of the most popular bands in the history of the world that actually, kind of like they do now in some hip-hop kind of bands, you couldn't like both. You had to pick sides, which surprised me because for our generations, like everybody likes both the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Now, I looked up Beatles versus Rolling Stones. I'm a big Rolling Stones fan. I think the Beatles are slightly overrated. I just said that.
Wow.
And the only reason I say that is they're rated higher than anybody. So how can they actually live up to that? This is how it was described by The Telegraph. The Beatles were pop. The Stones were rock. The former wholesome mop tops. The latter were dangerous rebels. John Lennon famously said the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, while the Stones had sympathy for the devil. So it was the good guys and the bad guys. I think the Rolling Stones were more punk rock and the Beatles were more pop. To me, the Rolling Stones, and any early documentary about the Rolling Stones, they were totally crazy drug addicts and weirdos and everything. And they were just everything that's good about rock and roll, which we don't even have anymore, was encapsulated in Rolling Stones. Where the Beatles, they changed everything. I'll admit that. Of course, they were an incredible band. But they were just kind of like, I don't know, I want to hold your hand. They were just a little wholesome for me.
So if you were living back in the 60s,
Rolling Stones.
You would have been a Rolling Stones fan.
1,000%. I also have a theory that people hate. By the way, the Dan Patrick Show, this was the number one thing people would call in and say, I hate McLovin about. I would say the Beatles, it was really this, that the Beatles were overrated. And I also said that basically, Let It Be is one of the great songs of all time. But then they Let It Be, Yesterday, and all the good Beatles songs are basically the same song redone a little bit. So this is basically Yesterday.
It's not, though. Yesterday is a different song.
It kind of is. So the Beatles, and Dylan's probably better than both of them, but the Rolling Stones copied everything the Beatles did, I'll give you that, but they did it with so much more flair and panache. So this wasn't supposed to be about the Beatles versus Rolling Stones. My point is, it's a great music rivalry in the sense that you could pit them against each other, and they're so iconic. That to me, that's the number one music rivalry of all time.
Okay. It certainly is a big one, but I've got a bigger one for you.
Okay.
Because the stakes ended up being as high as they can possibly be for this music rivalry, and that is Tupac versus Biggie. This is the ultimate rivalry because, unfortunately, it came to such a horrible end. Now, okay, you got the height of East Coast, West Coast rap. So let me just give you a little bit of a background here. Biggie and Tupac were friends first. Tupac was the more famous rapper first. He got famous first. 1994, Tupac comes to New York City to record an album or a song with Biggie and Puff Daddy at the time, Diddy. Tupac gets shot in the lobby of the recording studio 5 times and lived to tell about it, right? And he survived it. Just a few months after that, Biggie released a song called Who Shot Ya? Stu, if we can play that. That made Tupac think that Biggie and Diddy had set him up and they were trying to kill him. So then Tupac released Hit 'Em Up, and this was the great diss track that he took out Biggie, totally dissed him. A few months after that, Tupac died in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas. And then that was 96. Then 1997 in LA, while Biggie was attending the Soul Train Music Awards, he was shot and killed. I mean, because of the fatal endings here, I feel like it puts it in a totally different stratosphere. But you're talking about it started, Biggie and Tupac were probably the most famous of the East Coast, West Coast rap battles, but then it continued on because it was, Bad Boy versus Death Row, which was obviously Snoop, and and Dr. Dre, it's like this whole Suge Knight, I mean, this whole entire era of rivalry that Biggie and Tupac sort of spawned.
Well, I can't compete with the outcome of the...
Well, it's a sad outcome. I mean, we all know this, right? So,
well, you'll never be able to compete with it because Keith Richards is never going to die. So therefore, you can never compete with that.
Yeah.
What's the documentary? There's a recent documentary that was very good on Biggie versus Tupac. But my favorite part, and you'll appreciate this because I know you love them, Biggie versus Tupac, it really blew East Coast, West Coast. There was a Video Music Awards, or
the Source Awards.
The Source Awards, and
in New York.
Yeah, and during the documentary they go, and then off in the corner stood Wu-Tang alone, and they cut to RZA is wearing a ninja outfit in the crowd, full ninja outfit, while everyone's wearing a suit.
Yeah, that's squares.
Yeah. But it was, and that the Source Awards really was the apex of that right before the assassinations. Or sorry, I'm pulling Chris Rock here.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. That's unique too, because that really set the stage. You're right, for years.
And then other, there's been obviously other hip hop beefs off of this, like Jay-Z and Nas have a really big beef. There's been other ones, but for this, I think this is as big as it gets. And I think this is as, not just because of the fatal outcome and the tragic outcome here. I mean, they really, I think, for a short period of time, brought out the best in each other, and I think that's a big part of a rivalry.
Yeah, I think you can say the same with the Stones and the Beatles, by the way. Can we just say this? The one that I wanted to do with Taylor Swift versus Kanye.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And it's just so silly, too, because, they're different kinds of music, and they should have been... they should have gotten along fine.
Well, he interrupted her at the MTV Movie Awards.
Beyonce did not win that award. Was it MTV Awards or Grammys?
I think it was. Oh, was it the Grammys? Yeah.
Regardless, he interrupted. She won an award, and he said that should have gone to Beyonce. And then it's I think she's recently written songs about him. Wow.
And him about her. He did the celebrity song where she's all these famous people. Their wax figures are in a bed.
Also, people might misinterpret this. Within bands and within groups, there's all sorts of really intense dislikes and rivalries and hatreds through the years. But we did sort of bands against bands.
Yes. We didn't do like a John versus Paul or something like that.
Yeah. The Gallagher brothers.
Sure. Yeah. Right. We have some good ones here in the chat. YouTube.com/CBS Sports Radio is where you can watch the show, which was a couple here. I want to make sure I give credit to where it's due. I believe this was Delta 9 Brian said... Michael Jackson versus Prince. Now, I don't know what their relationship was like. I think that was more of a rivalry of who was going to hit number one or who had the more interesting music, right?
Similar to what Perloff was saying, you couldn't be a fan of either of both the Beatles and the Stones. I feel like you're on one side or the other with Prince or MJ.
Really?
No, I don't. I'm a little older than you guys. I don't think that was the case. I mean, MJ was unparalleled.
Yes, but the Prince fans, they're all about Prince, and they will to their death say that he was greater and more influential than MJ.
But Michael Jackson floated along without rivals. I mean, there was nobody in the 80s. There's just nobody who was like Michael Jackson. Maybe the Beatles in the 60s.
Michael Jackson was there. I feel like Madonna was she almost as famous. Someone put Madonna versus Cyndi Lauper in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, Madonna was huge.
Again, Delta 9 Brian. Nick in Texas says the Jackson Five versus the Partridge Family, to which Laura responded, they weren't even a real family, the Partridge Family. Should they be docked points because it was a TV show?
There's some other ones. How about Pearl Jam and Nirvana? You guys remember that?
Yeah, but
that's another big one.
They didn't get along at all till the very, very end, right? There's a famous thing right before Kurt Cobain died that him and Eddie Vedder hugged backstage one time, a week before he
buried the hatchet.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true, but that's a good one.
Let's go to Tony, who's in Pennsylvania. Hi, Tony. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. I'm really enjoying the show and the music comparisons. Thanks for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 60 years old. I grew up, my older brother, obviously 5 years older than me, grew up with the Beatles and the Stones. And I look at it, I think you can enjoy both of them and like both of them. I don't think you have to choose one. I mean, it's almost like LeBron versus Michael. They're both different. I mean, the Beatles had some rock going on, the Helter Skelter and stuff like that. But they just did so much, I think, in the 8 years. They had so many smash hits. And, again, I don't think that you can get caught up in saying it's almost like people will bring the Led Zeppelin band into the mix.
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin fans will say, oh, man, Led Zeppelin was better than the Rolling Stones. But I do agree with what you said, Perloff, about Michael Jackson and First Prince. I mean, Michael Jackson was just unbelievable. And I'm a Ghetto Boys fan. I grew up, with the disco era, but I out of Houston, Texas, a little Bushwick Bill guy rapping. They didn't get much radio play because they were so hard lyrics. Remember Mine Playing Tricks on You? Remember that song? That was the radio song from the Ghetto Boys.
Okay.
But I'll hang up and listen. Thanks for. Hey, the first rapper was Dr. Zeus. Let's give a shout out to that. But love your show.
Thank you so much. Seeing this one from Trevor St. McGoodbody in the chat. So cool. NSYNC versus Backstreet Boys.
Yeah.
Height of the boy band rivalries.
Did they sort of? I don't remember this. I mean, I assume you had posters on your wall. Did they get after each other a little bit in the press?
I mean, I think it was just like who was going to have as many girls screaming for him as possible.